Hi, this is my YouTube channel, What's Wrong with the World and How to Fix It. I'm Dr. Terry Lay. The subtitle of the channel is History, Human Nature and Society Today. I'm interested in looking at some of the deeper issues which lie behind some of our current problems, and my background's in sociology, so I'm talking about typical sociological topics, but also topics of general interest. And I'm Dr. Terry Lay, a sociologist from way back. Anyway, what I'm going to be talking about today, I entitled this talk, Lobsters and Demonic Males. Actually, it's more about lobsters than demonic males. I'll talk about demonic males more in the next video. But anyway, it's about the evolutionary psychology point of view on aggression and competitiveness generally. And the sociological view that I talked about in the last video. And really it's about the arguments that evolutionary psychologists use to attack the sociological view. What I said in the last video was that sociologists tend to believe that aggression is a tool of human nature rather than a basic desire, so that there's no basic desire to harm people, and people don't naturally enjoy and take pleasure out of harming other people. It's not a basic drive to do that in a way. But on the other hand, when your needs or wants are frustrated by someone else's actions, it's typical that that you will be able to make use of aggression to try and get what you want. Okay. So the evolutionary psychology view is that it's, you know, like I said, that competition is a natural desire and so on. That evolution is responsible for creating this aggressive drive. The survival of the fittest implies that that evolution will end up by creating this aggressive drive. And once we understand how evolution works, that we won't find any surprise that there's aggressive behaviour and that there's so much aggression in human societies. And you could call, I recall this talk, Lobster Salad, in honour of Jordan Peterson, a recent and extremely popular social psychologist who's, one of his great examples is a lobster in a cave underwater, you know, has to defend their turf against other possible lobster attacks, and so they become extremely aggressive. And he recommends this as a strategy for people to, you know, I mean, you'd have to say the book's mostly written to men, but for men to sort of stand up for themselves and fight for themselves. And it's actually part of their evolutionary inheritance to be able to do this. And otherwise, you know, like they never would have arrived on the planet if they hadn't developed these options through evolution. And like, I suppose, I mean, one thing I would say about that initially is, and yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely in favor of people standing up for themselves and like, yeah, and totally agree with it. Evolution fits us to do that, and it's not surprising that we have a desire to look after our own interests and so on. But what I find about in practice, I think that that Jordan Peterson is talking to a lot of people men who actually don't have any problem standing up for themselves, and they exist in a state of perpetual grumpiness, rushing around to find out, oh, how can I stand up for myself more? You know, like the person who's tailgating you in their car as you're driving along at 55 instead of 60 because it's raining or something. Or the person who almost runs over your dog because they have to ride their bike at, you know, 30 Ks in a park or whatever. I mean, excuse me, these people don't need to be told how to stand up for themselves. And what I'd say about the way this is received by such people is that in a sense, it ends up that they exercise their aggressive feelings against people who are the wrong targets, you know, like people who don't have much power actually, and, you know, like the person walking their dog or someone like that, he's got nothing, he's not doing them any harm at all, and they could actually, you know, do better by just letting these people go about their business. I mean, in other words, that often this aggression is directed against people that are not actually the right targets. And we could look at this more broadly in terms of how the way refugees and Aborigines and people like that become the target of this kind of macro aggression when really these are people are struggling to live. The other thing I'd say about it is that what it's saying to these people who like this book and who are carried away by this way of looking at things, is that it closes off the benefits of actually enjoying looking after other people. That I mean, it may be a part of human nature to want what you want and, to stand up for yourself and so on. And yeah, that's all very true. But it's also a part of human nature to enjoy looking after other people, to enjoy the pleasure of looking after other people. And I don't just mean in terms of the reciprocal affection that you get back by doing that or more material paybacks, but I mean the actual act of caring for other people is a pleasure in itself. And that these kind of ways of looking at this situation, emphasizing the necessity for aggressive behavior, actually tend to lead to a mindset which ignores that and passes over that, to great detriment to the people who are caught up in this way of thinking about things. Okay, so let me now be a bit more kind of fair in a way, and less ad hominem, and talk more about the arguments that people like this use. Okay, so what they'd say is that competitive aggression is necessary because of the necessity of survival of the fittest. In other words, in order to survive in an environmental in a competitive environment, which is the way the planet is, if you like, then you need to be able to be competitive and aggressive. So that's the first thing they say, and evolution favours that. That's their first argument, right? Their second argument is that the sociological position, which I outlined in the last talk, which is that aggression is just a tool, is not actually distinct. There's no difference really between that theory and their theory. So I'll come back to that. And the third thing that they do is they provide evidence from ape societies to try and get a sort of grip on what human nature is like, and say, like we can't be all that different to chimpanzees and even orangutans and baboons and so on, to whom we're fairly closely related in terms of our DNA and so on. So I'm going to go through all these 3 points. Okay, survival of the fittest. According to evolutionary psychologists, aggression is a part of human nature. To survive and pass on their genes, members of a species need to be competitive. And they'll say things like there are scarce resources of food, nest sites, mates, and so on. And so consequently, in order to grab these scarce resources, people have to be aggressive and prepared to fight other people and so on. and consequently, and I'm using the words of Tiger and Fox here, the human nature includes the pursuit of unfair shares. In other words, it's part of human nature to try and get more for yourself than other people are getting, and not to share things out fairly. Okay, so here's my reply to that argument. First of all, it makes sense to say that there's evolutionary advantage in being able to compete when your interests are threatened. Yeah, I can see that. But when your interests are not threatened, it actually makes more evolutionary sense to cooperate. So it's like the idea that evolution would favour aggression as a sort of drive. I can't live well unless I'm enjoying some aggressive behaviour. Doesn't make any sense, because in situations where it's actually more in evolutionary advantage to cooperate, then this drive just gets in the way. Excuse me, this is a big problem then if you're always aggressive and you have a desire to do harm to other people that's generalized. And in fact, nobody really thinks like that either. But theoretically, they don't take that into account. Social animals prosper by helping others. I mean, one of the classic examples that I read was chimpanzees, when they arrive at a source of food, like a big tree which is full of fruit and so on, The chimpanzees who arrive there first don't go, I want all of this fruit for myself. I'm not letting anyone else know about it. No, they scream and shout and encourage other chimpanzees to arrive and enjoy the feast. Now, that's altruistic cooperative behavior, and it makes sense for chimpanzees in the sense of surviving well and so on. If we want to be, coldly rationalistic about this, and we're looking for a knockdown argument against this perspective, this evolutionary psych perspective, the best thing is to look up Prisoner's Dilemma games and Robert Axelrod's Evolution of Cooperation. He wrote an article first and then a book. Basically, the Prisoner's Dilemma sets up a situation. It's so hard to explain. I don't know that I want to be bothered with all of that. But basically, it sets up a situation where in an individual case, you've got a motive for being nasty because you can't be sure that the other person's going to be cooperative. And if they're nasty, it's better to be nasty than to be cooperative. It's only if you don't know if they're going to be cooperative or not, that's a problem. So in which case, it's better to be nasty in advance. Now, what Robert Axelrod did was he set this game up, this Prisoner's Dilemma game up, in a situation where the one player would be playing against the same player through a whole, like 200 games, right? And then worked out what strategy would actually lead to the best outcome. The best strategy is what's called the tit-for-tat strategy. In the tit-for-tat strategy, wait a minute, I've got this here, page 144, yeah. This is my book, Human Nature and what is it? I don't know. Humanist Realism for Sociologists, that's right. See, I'm promoting my book really well here. Anyway, on the first move, cooperate, be unselfish. Like, okay, when you first meet this person, you don't know what they're going to do. The best thing to do at that point is to be cooperative. You do the cooperative altruistic thing and hope that they'll reciprocate. On every following move, if they're nasty to you, you're nasty back. If they're nice to you, you don't try tricking them and be nasty back, you be cooperative back. And so at any point in the game, when they suddenly start to cooperate, you cooperate back straight away. You don't punish them for being nasty in the past, you cooperate instantly. You don't aim to do better than them. You only aim to maximize the advantages through cooperation. So you're unselfish if the other player's unselfish, and selfish if they've behaved selfishly. If they return to being unselfish, then you reciprocate in kind. Okay, so that's called the tit-for-tat strategy, and that's a strategy that actually works better rather than being nasty. So in other words, from the point of view of survival of the fittest, it actually makes sense that people will have been programmed by evolution to be cooperative. And we know they're cooperative. I mean, the empirical reality is that not just the human species, but other species are cooperative and altruistic in their behavior with other members of their own species who are not related to them as kin. In other words, like, okay, well, I won't go why that's relevant, but anyway. We know that they are, but the problem is to explain why in an evolutionary sense, in a situation where every other person is being programmed by evolution to be selfish, why the unselfish person actually has an advantage by being cooperative. This Prisoner's Dilemma game set up by Robert Axelrod shows why that is the case. And basically people like Jordan Peterson basically just haven't done their homework. They just don't know the literature properly. All right, let me say one last thing. The bonobos are a species of ape, a kind of chimpanzee really, and I'll probably talk about them a bit more later, but like, let's just say that in terms of aggression, they're very, very different to other ape species in that they're gender egalitarian. The male and female chimpanzees have, bonobos have equal authority. That there's no bad behavior by male chimpanzees in relationship to females or infants, like rape or battering or whatever, which takes place in the other chimpanzee species. They respond to a stranger entering their territory with affection. In fact, the females go up and start having sex with them. While the males look on, not the least bit jealous, and then join in later. I mean, this is bizarre behavior, you'd have to say, but it's interesting. And what I would be saying about that is that I mean, whatever else you want to say about it, you could say heaps about it, and I probably may come back to it. But the fact is that this kind of the bonobos have survived like this for millions of years. Like they separated from the chimpanzee species. I think I wrote this down somewhere else. 4 million years ago, yeah. Or million years, no, they separated from the chimpanzee species 1 million years ago. That's right. Well, I'll come back to that anyway. So they've survived quite well without behaving in aggressive, competitive ways and without having masculine aggression, demonic males and so on. Okay, let me move on to the second argument. The second argument, I'm just going to give myself a bit more time. The second argument is that there's no real difference between the sociological view and the urge to kill theory. Sociologists say we're only aggressive when we are frustrated by the actions of another person. Yet these situations take place all the time and are inevitable. So someone says the idea that we could have we could all be peaceful if we didn't have causes to go to war is a ridiculous idea, because we always have causes to go to war. So excuse me, conflicts are inevitable in human society and so on. So why does it make any difference? This is an application of the scientific principle of Occam's razor, like choose the simplest theory to explain what's happening, right? So then they say, so aggression must be part of human nature. This is the urge to kill theory. And like I point out in more length in the last talk, these theories are actually quite different. In the sociological view, aggression can be defused by dealing with the problem in another way. In other words, when there's a conflict between people, one response is to use physical aggression or the threat of aggression to get your own way. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that your need that's being frustrated can be satisfied in some other way. Either they decide to negotiate some sort of solution, or something else happens which intervenes, which means that their opposition is no longer a problem for you. That's a crucial difference between the urge to kill theory and the sociological theory of aggression. And evolutionary psychologists, it's fascinating actually, they just pretend not to notice this difference. All right, the last thing that they talk about is the evidence of other ape species. So what they're saying is, like, because human beings are natural, creatures of the planet, and yeah, who can doubt that, we can look around then to see what other species are similar to us, especially in terms of DNA, to get an idea of what the nature of humans might be like. This is certainly not a stupid idea. And so if we look at the other ape species, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, baboons, and so on, we can find a lot of those aggressive, competitive, and especially male aggression, demonic males, and so on. So I am talking about it. Behaviors in those other ape species. Their social behavior includes things like battering, like, in other words, a young male who wants to establish himself in a chimpanzee group will pull off a branch and start bashing everybody with that, especially the women, but other males and so on, and attain dominance through that. There's child killing, especially in gorillas, like, I won't go into that, it's too awful. Dominance hierarchies maintained by force, by the threat of bashing and so on. Rape, especially orangutans. Hostile attacks on strangers like chimpanzees and so on. So these are certainly sorts of behaviors that occur in human societies. And so what evolutionary psychologists say is, well, okay, let's look at chimpanzees as a bit classic example, very similar to us in terms of DNA. And like, like these behaviors occur in chimpanzees, and clearly they can't be the result of socialization in chimpanzees, because we're looking at a range of different chimpanzee societies that haven't influenced each other, and we're looking at chimpanzees in zoos, and like, it's not socialization here. So this must be part of the nature of chimpanzees. So why not, when we look at these sort of similar behaviors in humans, why not the nature of humans. And this is, I think this is a very persuasive argument. And I want to suggest, you know, a number of different responses. One is, so the first thing is this: the best evidence for human nature is what we actually do as humans, right? And my argument is that sociologists, and I'll talk about this more in the talk next time, have a really good explanation of why a lot of these behaviors occur in human societies. And in some ways, what they're talking about is not that different. You could explain a lot of the behavior in ape societies, aggressive behavior, in a similar way, or in a sense, there are similar social patterns which lead to aggressive behavior in ape and human societies, and I'll talk about that. So, you know, like ultimately, at the end of the day, anthropologists and historians are the ones who we should be listening to when we're talking about human nature, not people studying chimpanzees. Duh. Yeah. Okay. The second thing is this, that far from the behavior of ape species being like laid down by a genetic program, you know, and always the same, is actually quite different. And there are two interesting examples. One is the chimpanzees that Jane Goodall was studying. They're famous for having their aggressive behavior and attacking chimpanzees who wandered into their area from another troop, and so on and so forth. The warlike behavior of these chimpanzees is like, ugh. And what people have suddenly realized about this study is that Jane Goodall didn't notice any of this kind of aggressive behavior until something different happened. And you know what happened? She put up a cage with bananas in it, which she would let the chimps have bananas at particular times of the day and stuff. So suddenly, in other words, there's the plasticity of this behavior. This aggressive behavior was not uniform, always, all the time, driven by urges that are innate and manifest as a desire to enjoy the pleasures of bashing other people up. No, they're actually responding to a situation where desires were being frustrated, and they were trying to fend off conflicts with other chimps who might also be trying to get the bananas. Okay, and the second example is there was a tribe of baboons who used to forage on a dump, and the tribe caught tuberculosis, and the key males in the tribe all dropped dead, right? Now, what happened in that situation was that suddenly the female baboons took power. There was much more of this affiliative nicey-nicey behavior than there'd ever been when the male were leading the troop. And the younger males were not being bashed up by the superior males in the troop, and the whole ball game changed. What that suggests, if we apply those lessons to human society, what that suggests is that we could probably change human behavior quite drastically from what it's been and what our awful history reveals by changing the sort of social structures in which aggression takes place. All right. The third thing is, and this is like the elephant in the room, if you like, the bonobos are as closely related to us as the chimpanzees are. We split from the chimpanzee bonobo line 4 million years ago, right? Up until that, there were no humans on the planet, right? You know, like at that point, our ancestors, Australopithecus and whatever, started to become different from the chimpanzee line, right? At that point in time, there was no distinction between chimps and bonobos. What happened 1 million years ago is that the chimps and bonobo lines split. So it may well be that the bonobos are actually closer to us genetically than the chimpanzees. Now, I've talked to you a bit about what the bonobos do, and I really recommend you go and find out more about them. They're just amazing. And what you could say about the bonobos is that their social strategy, as it were, is very similar to the social strategy recommended by second wave feminism. In other words, alliances of women which act to prevent men from taking power in society, which dominate the care of young boys and prevent them from being recruited into patriarchy. That is exactly the strategy of the bonobos, and it's a strategy that's recommended by second wave feminism. And the fact is the bonobos suggest to us that this strategy can actually work. So the next video will be on this particular topic, and I'll look into this in more detail. What are the social structures that cause aggressive competitive behavior, especially where men are concerned, to be so common in human societies that we can look at through anthropology and history, and to come up with a different explanation of that from the wrong explanations offered by evolutionary psychology. So thanks for listening.